Welcome, everybody. My name is Casey Keel, and today I'm going to talk to you about 5 ways to teach summarizing in middle school language arts. Before I jump into those 5 ways, I'm just going to start by talking about why I wrote this blog post today. So, recently, I'm walking around my 6th grade language arts class. I'm stopping casually at one student after another, doing mini reading conference check ins, and I stop in with this one particular student and I throw out the question of, what are you reading about today? What happened in the story you're reading? And she looked at me and she said this: I'm reading the words, but I'm not thinking about what is actually happening in the book. And I have to admit, I paused there for a second. I didn't really know where to go from there. But then when I started thinking about it, I thought about how often it is that we are reading, but we're not thinking about our reading. And summarizing is one of those things that I just assume that a lot of students have control over. But as I'm teaching 6th grade language arts this year, I'm realizing over and over again that it is one of those reading skills that isn't quite there for a lot of students. So that is the basis of this whole blog post. Summarizing is something that students really need to have control over in order to do a lot of the other reading behaviors, such as inferring, predicting, making connections, critiquing, analyzing. All of those things rest on a student's ability to know what's happening in the book and what those important events of the book are before they can insert their thinking and their opinion around them. So today I'm going to talk about 5 different shifts that you can make when teaching summarizing, 5 different ideas of places that you can go. So here we go. First of all, before teaching any of them, I think it's important that you just make sure students have a common understanding of what summarizing is and also what it isn't. I love this anchor chart. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger here. So I love this anchor chart that I have up in my room this year called the do's and don'ts of summarizing. So they basically go off of each other, but the first one, do include the most important events of the chapter, but don't give every single detail of what happened. Be selective. The next one, do list the events in chronological order. And then the flip side, don't include those insignificant details. So making sure that you're ordering it in the events that happen in the chapter. Next one, do be objective. So stick to what actually happened in the text. Don't include your opinions, thoughts, or predictions. And then the last one, do include the names of characters and don't refer to characters as he or she and give general things like they went here or there. Use actual names of places and names of characters. So once students have that foundation of what summarizing is, then we can go and talk about how to teach it. So the first thing I have, change 1, change your prompting. So a lot of times what we say to students when we want them to summarize is, can you summarize this chapter? Can you summarize the book so far? And maybe changing it up with how you ask that question can make a big difference. First of all, notice that every single one of these prompts has to do with a chapter versus asking about the whole book. Asking students to summarize that whole book can be really overwhelming to some students. So focusing it on a chapter allows that task to be a little bit more manageable. And you can also ask follow-up questions after these questions to get into what happened prior to that part in the book. So some other ideas. What do you think the author wants the reader to remember about this chapter? How did the main conflict build or work toward a resolution in this chapter? And what happened to the main character in this chapter of the book? All of these prompts gets this reader to really think about that idea of what is the most important. What is that main event from the chapter that I should be bringing with me as I continue reading on this text? How did this chapter help build up that conflict or work toward resolving the conflict? So a few ideas of some prompts. Another idea is this summarizing roller coaster. So I feel like a lot of times when we're asking students to summarize, it's like, hey, write me a paragraph of what happened, or write me a bulleted list in chronological order of what happened. And this is just a fun way for students to visualize summarizing differently. This is simply a Google Jamboard, and I just inserted that rectangle shape in the middle, as that represents neutral. So that represents not a positive event or a negative event. So what I ask students to do is on that Google Jamboard, they add sticky notes for each plot event of that chapter that was important. This actually comes from chapter 14 of Percy Jackson and the Sea of Monsters, a read aloud that I recently did with my students. So anything above the line is a positive plot event that happened to the main character. Anything below the line is a negative plot event in that chapter that happened to the main character. Students plot the events from left to right across the line. So as you go across the line horizontally, that also represents the chronological order of the events. Also, you'll notice that the post-it notes are different levels above and below the line. So students could kind of decide, is that a super positive event, a super negative event, or maybe something slightly above or slightly below. And then at the end, students just take the drawing tool and they just draw a line from one plot event to the other to have that roller coaster effect. So a fun way to get students to visualize summarizing and just mix it up a little bit. Plus, it's a Google Jamboard. So this could be something where you do this with an interactive read aloud and students are working with partners collaboratively. Or if you're doing small reading groups, you could get students in a small group and collaboratively work on summarizing a chapter together this way, or in groups of 2 to 3. So it's a fun way to mix it up. Next idea is to insert a partner reading routine. So if your students need a little bit of practice with fluency and they also need a little help with summarizing, this is a great way to bring those two things together. This could be about a 3 to 5 minute routine that you insert in once a week, twice a week, every day, whatever really fits into your schedule and however much you think your students need this. So what you would do is you would have students take out their independent reading book, open up to the page in their independent reading book that they are currently on, and look back to the previous 5 pages and select one full page of text. They then bring that selected page to a partner and they take turns where each partner reads their selected page aloud. And after they are done reading that selected page, they answer that question of what plot events happened that led up to what happened on this page. So students are practicing their fluency by reading aloud. They are also practicing their summarizing skills by explaining the plot events that led up to what actually happened on that page. I really like this summarizing strategy because it brings students directly into the real details of the text without them, I guess, making up what they think happened. It's bringing them directly back into the text, refreshing their memory of what they just read, and then going into that summarizing piece. So once again, this is a great thing to add in to your daily literacy block a couple times a week or even every day if time allows. It can be very quick once students get the hang of it. Next up, model summarizing during interactive read aloud. So our last interactive read aloud as a class was The Sea of Monsters, I think it's the second book in the Percy Jackson series. And what I did is after each time that we read a chapter, so for the most part, they're pretty long chapters in the book. We read about 1 chapter a day, sometimes 2. We would stop and we would summarize that chapter. Now, I didn't always do it the same way. Sometimes we stopped and I said, okay, here are the main events of that chapter. I pulled open the Google Doc and I just typed them out and thought aloud as I was typing of why I selected the events I did, how I put them in chronological order. Sometimes I would ask for feedback from the class where I'd say, turn and talk to your partner of what you think the main events of the chapter were. All right, now let's share out and collaboratively come up with a summary for today's chapter together as a class. Other ways that I've done it were having like 2 or 3 students be the summarizing leaders of the day. If it's a shared Google Doc, give them access to it, have them go in and type the summary of the chapter as we're reading it and share out their summary with the class and maybe make revisions to it based on what they got from the first time around of them attempting to summarize that chapter. So that's a fun way as well. I also really like this because it's good to show students how one chapter connects to another. Students who are absent could go back and read the chapter summaries. And it also shows students that if you're having trouble remembering what you've read or attending to what you've read, this is a good strategy. Even if you're not always writing it down word for word, just kind of thinking of that stop sign at the end of the chapter and actually going back and asking yourself, okay, what were the main events of that chapter? What order did they come in? How did they connect to what's happened before? Just showing students that this is a type of thinking that good readers do. And then my fifth suggestion is to make sure that you are putting summarizing into your curriculum as a spiral. So, what I mean by that is avoid teaching reading behaviors as a unit. Do not have 2 weeks of, we're going to do summarizing lessons for 2 weeks straight. So, for 10 class periods, 10 days in a row, we are going to practice summarizing and we are going to summarize and summarize and summarize and summarize. That just doesn't really make sense to do a summary unit, because then students are practicing summarizing that same book. And then you're checking it off the calendar and you're saying, we're done summarizing for the year. I've taught it. They should know it. We're moving on. Summary should be something that's spiraling. So, for instance, I do reading units and I get through about 6 reading units across the year. So, I'm alternating those reading units with my writing units. So every time we are in a reading unit, I make sure that there's aspects of reading mini lessons that teach summary in different ways. Also, students are then applying summarizing skills to different genres of text, which is really great as well. So make sure that as you survey your curriculum, that summary is not something that's plopped in, checked off the list, something that you're coming back to again and again, multiple times across the year with multiple genres, giving students that practice that they need to do it. Also, you're not always teaching it in the exact same way. You're coming around to it in different ways to get students thinking about summarizing through different aspects of the plot. So those are the 5 different ways that I blogged about. You can go to theliteracyeffect.com. The blog post that I'm referring to is called 5 Ways to Teach Summarizing. It will also be linked below. Additionally, if you are looking for reading units in a year-long reading curriculum that has that spiral effect where it's teaching those reading behaviors again and again across each unit, across the year through different genres, I do have 7 reading units made specifically for middle school. Each of those reading units contains 20 reading mini lessons. And so for a total of 140 different reading mini lessons across the year for students to be practicing those different reading strategies and skills with different genres of text. And you can find those at bit.ly/MS reading units. I will also link those below. Thank you so much for joining in today. And I hope that you got a new idea or two about teaching summarizing, incorporating summarizing into your literacy block. Please let me know in the comments below if you have further questions. And thanks again for tuning in. Have a great day.